Hello, everyone. Welcome to this AAJA-Asia Digital Salon with Patricia. Before the meeting, I would like to share with you some house rule that we would like you guys to follow during the meeting. So during the meeting, please be sure to mute yourself and turn your camera on during the presentation. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. AAJA is committed to provide a friendly, safe, and also welcoming environment for all. Every participant has the right to enjoy their training experience without fear of harassment or discrimination as stated in the AAJA Code of Conduct. If you have any question, you can take a look at the QR code link above. The AAJA, the Asian American Journalists Association, is a membership nonprofit organization with more than 1,500 members across the United States and Asia. Launched in 1996, AAJA-Asia chapter is open to all media professionals and students who strive for diversity, inclusion, and editorial excellence in the Asia-Pacific region. AAJA-Asia mission is to advance news diversity in Asia, foster the next generation of journalists, empower journalists from underrepresented communities, strengthen trust in quality journalism, and contribute to building more democratic and harmonious societies through fair representation in Asia news. And now I would like to pass it to Eric to coordinate with the meeting. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and evening, Patricia in the US. So I'd like to begin by introducing Patricia Evangelista. She's a trauma journalist and former investigative reporter for the Philippines online news outlet Rappler. She's covered armed conflicts. She covered the aftermath of the Super Typhoon Haiyan, for which she was awarded the Kate Webb Prize for exceptional journalism in dangerous conditions, awarded by AFP News Agency, which I work for. I'm also a member of the AAJA in Hong Kong. She really came to prominence internationally with her work on, and of course in the Philippines, with her work on investigating President Rodrigo Duterte's drug war. And she lives in Manila, although tonight she's in the US. So I think it's 9 o'clock at night, your side, Patricia. So thank you for
9 p.m.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Your book has it's received lots of accolades. Book of the Year from New York Times, The Economist, David Renwick, very renowned editor of the New Yorker, called it a journalistic masterpiece. President Barack Obama said it was one of his books of the year on his Christmas list. So I wanted to begin by asking you to read. You said you would like to read an extract from the book, so maybe perhaps we can set the scene and give us a sense of those listening who haven't read the book, perhaps, to give a sense of the tone of the book. Thanks.
This is from chapter 5, where the chapter is called Defend the Mayor. So this is when people are voting for President Rodrigo Duterte. And it's a series of stories of people who have decided to vote for the former president for many different reasons. And the next few paragraphs is a summation of their reasoning. To vote for Rodrigo Duterte, you had to believe in certain things. You had to believe, for example, that he was a righteous man. You had to believe that he wasn't a rapist and didn't want to be a rapist. You had to believe he was poor, or was once poor, or had lived with the poor. You had to believe in destiny. You had to believe in God. You had to believe that God had a peculiar preference for deadly autocrats because the presidency is destiny and Rodrigo Duterte was destined to lead. To believe in Rodrigo Duterte You had to believe he was brave. You had to believe he would cut America out of military agreements and that Barack Obama was a son of a bitch. You had to believe, you had to fear China, or you had to love China, or you had to believe, in the face of China's territorial aggression, that Rodrigo Duterte was willing to ride a jet ski out into the open sea to plant a flag on the disputed islands China had seized. To believe in Rodrigo Duterte, you had to believe he was a killer, or that he was joking when he said he was a killer. You had to believe in the specter of a narco state, or you had to believe that he was only playing to the crowd. You had to believe drug addiction is criminal, that drug addicts are not human, and that their massacre can be considered acceptable public policy. You had to believe he could make crime and corruption and illegal drugs disappear in 3 to 6 months. You had to believe that a mayor who kept peace by ordering undesirables out of his city could succeed in a country where undesirables were citizens too. You had to believe the intended dead would be drug lords and rapists, only drug lords and rapists, and not your cousins who go off into Liguasan Marsh to pick up their baggies of meth. You had to believe there would be a warning before the gunshots ring out. To believe in Rodrigo Duterte, you had to believe he was just. You had to believe he was honest. You had to believe he was untainted by the oligarchy and beholden to no one. You had to believe he was your father. You had to believe he was your savior. You had to believe he loved you because you love him enough to carry his name. That's page 118.
I mean, what was the connection he had with the Filipino people? I mean, reading the book, I mean, one point you make is the lack of empathy that his predecessor, Aquino, had. You talk about, he wouldn't apologize when they killed the Hong Kong tourists in the bus, the hostage taking in Manila, the lack of empathy when he went to Typhoon Haiyan. So how do you explain Duterte's connection with the people that they did believe what he said?
Well, Duterte told a story. He took every fear, every grievance, fueled by decades of failed expectations, and then he gave the enemy a name. He called it the scourge of illegal drugs. He said that he would kill to destroy it, that the fish would feed fat on the corpses of criminals, that if your neighbor's child is an addict, kill them yourselves. It will be a kindness to their parents. What Duterte offered, as you said, in the aftermath of a failure of empathy, was that he could make himself every man, so that every man could be Rodrigo Duterte if they wanted. He said, I'm one of you. He said, I'm no one special. He said, I'm just an ordinary killer. In the mythology of Duterte, he was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, who would give you a warning and then count 1, 2, 3. So he painted himself as different, but also carrying the same rage as everyone else. And it mattered.
And his use of, I mean, one thing that strikes me through the whole book is your attention to language and also your fascination with language. I mean, very early on, you talk about the difference between active and passive verbs, which is a very journalistic thing. The policeman shot the drug dealer, not the drug dealer was shot by the policeman. And one aspect of the book was the challenge of translating what the president said into English to get the sense of what he was saying. When he swore, I mean, and he used a lot of profanities. What resonance did that have? Did he do it? Was that the way he speaks, or was it deliberate just to have a resonance with the ordinary person?
I think that's the way he speaks, certainly. And I'm sure he's aware of the resonance it has with Filipinos. It's not like we're shy about saying putang ina. I'm not. And although it is not standard expectation to think of a head of state swearing as a head of state, it separated Rodrigo Duterte from everyone else. It made him different. It made him someone who was willing to break the rules and say, none of this fucking matters. What matters is my people. I will kill for them. I will curse at the enemy. He was different.
Mhm. You describe yourself as a trauma reporter. Can you explain what that means to you?
Well, for I think a lot of Filipino journalists are trauma reporters. And for the longest time, because I covered the aftermath of internal conflict, of disasters, of various tragedies, I didn't know what to call my beat. And it seemed very strange to just say I come in the aftermath of a death toll. And it was only, I think, in 2015 when I took a fellowship from the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma that I understood what I was doing, and that I found uh, a word for it. I always look for words for particular things. And that trauma is not isolated to death or to conflict. It could be a car accident. It could be the death of a loved one to cancer. It could be any sort of tragedy that takes someone out of a normal circumstance and thrusts them into something different. And people react to trauma differently all over the world, depending on the circumstance. So there is a particular sort of journalism that's trauma informed. We come in the aftermath of trauma and we do our damnedest that we do not exacerbate trauma, but also with awareness that the story has to be told.
And you go into great detail. I mean, one thing that was, I think, great when you worked for Rappler with Maria Ressa was the amount of time you had to do these investigations into the drug war. You did the series, I think it was a 7-part series. I think Maria
Uh,
called it Unity series. I mean, you worked
um,
like 6 months, so which is
no, the impunity series lasted from 2016 to 2019,
right. Okay,
actually. I think with a number of collaborators, it was 23, 24 stories.
right. It was the killings in Manila. Was it focused mainly on Manila or was it throughout the country?
It was focused in Metro Manila. I'm based in Metro Manila. Occasionally, I would leave, sometimes for Cebu, sometimes elsewhere. But there was such a velocity of death in Manila that there wasn't enough of us, even in one house or across multiple agencies, to cover everything. So I am grateful that Rappler gave me the time. Um, it's for the one story I did, it took 6 months to investigate the outsourcing of murders to vigilantes, allegedly by the police. And Rappler waited. They waited quite a while. Not that they did it quietly. There was a lot of kicking and screaming on both sides, of course. But I'm grateful for that. We were a very small house, so it was uh, it was a sacrifice to let go of one reporter to do just this one thing.
And you talked about translation. There was one killing of 32 people were killed, and the president, I think when you reported it, you said the president said it was good, but you could also have translated it as beautiful. Somebody had written a comment. Cecil Morella, a longtime colleague of mine from AFP, put a comment. Duterte took issue with your translation, with our translation of the way he described Obama. We used the literal one, son of a whore. What were the challenges of translating what he was saying into English?
It was very challenging. Um, Part of the fact checking, and the fact checking was brutal. Um, I put together a team of 7 of the best reporters I knew, or there were some historians there as well. Um, and when it came to looking at what the president said, we went through layers of fact checking. The way I built the book was across the entirety of his presidency. I had a database, and a researcher helped me out with this. There was a database of 19,000 pages
Mm.
of all the president's speeches. The entirety, not even the entirety of his rhetoric. I'm pretty sure there are things we never managed to pick up. They were taken from the official government website or from the emails that were sent to journalists when official transcripts would come out, or if it is something that he said at a press conference, I would have someone transcribe it. So the way I would work was I would take something he said from that database, find the original speech, translate it myself, integrate it into the book. But I wrote the book across 4 years. And at some point there, I was going to make a mistake. Sometimes it's just my translation. Sometimes I may have misheard, or sometimes I may have trusted transcript without checking video. And video was supposed to be primary source. So what my fact checkers would do was they would take the English line, translate it back into Filipino, find the transcript where it belonged, check if the citation was correct, and then look at the video, check in the video if the line exists. Sometimes the government would edit the official video. There would be parts missing. So we would put that in the bibliography or find the second source. And then it would turn around again and we would check translation. I have another translator, a poet actually, who would look at the accuracy of my translation and our fidelity to the president's meaning. I don't use son of a whore. I use son of a bitch because I try to be as loyal to what he means. Although there's really no proper interpretation, and Cecil is right, it's difficult. So in the end notes of the book, there's an explanation of the choices I made across the book. And it's not just him. There are difficulties, for example, when translating what a policeman said. Am I allowed to swear here? I'm really not very certain anymore. Yeah? Okay. There was a line. The line said, "You son of a bitch." No. Or was it motherfucker? Huh. Maybe son of a bitch. And when my fact checker came back to me, she said, "Pat, you're wrong. He didn't say son of a bitch. He didn't say putang ina." And I go, "Well, what did he say?" And this was a cop who was talking. He said puking ina, which in translation is your mother's vagina. And I couldn't find a comparative swear word. I do not use that particular swear word, which is not me talking about my virtue. I have a very large collection of swear words. It's just not in my repertoire. So I had to go through 3 different writers to figure out what the proper terminology should be. I think the choice was either motherfuck or for fuck's sake. I think we went for fuck's sake. I can't hear you, Eric.
In the AAJA reporting, you said that after you did the report, you built the scenes in your mind. You said you could only really write it if you could do that. You didn't want the dead to be just one line in a report, or one line in a police report. So can you describe that process?
I am a long form narrative investigative reporter, even in Rappler. It's just with the book, the form is much longer, but it was always long form. And there was many of us who were part of the night shift, and I was really lucky because I wasn't a beat reporter and I had to learn the night shift. And I was working side by side with some of the best photojournalists, reporters, both foreign correspondents and local correspondents in Manila, at the Manila Police District. And we covered crime scene after crime scene. It's just that there were so many crime scenes. And for someone like me who worked in long form, the detail is overwhelming. And it was very difficult to ground myself in the scene. It is not normal to be facing corpses every day. So you have to find a way to deal with it so you could do the job. Um, for me, it was asking the same question every night. At every crime scene, it was a methodology, a pattern. Um, I would ask, was the killer a cop or a vigilante? Was it a salvaging, a buy bust, a drive by, a body dump? I would ask, were the hands bound? Was the head wrapped in tape? Was the body stuffed into the bag? Was there a gun on the ground? Was there a sign beside the body? You go through a mental checklist. You verify the street corner. You interview the investigating officer. You sidle up to the bystanders. You ask if they know the dead man's name. Except during the drug war, and I don't know if it was the same for the other journalists, I learned how to stand still and just listen for the screaming, because that's when you know where the families are. So you walk up to them, you roll both recorders, you apologize, you condole, you keep your voice low, your question simple, factual. What was his name? Where was he born? Where did he live? When did you see him last? How did you know he was gone? Mostly what I asked was, tell me what happened, and then tell me what happened next. And the reason I did that um, is that it's very hard to ask people how they feel at that moment. It's wrong to ask them how they feel. It is the worst. You are walking into the aftermath of the worst moments of their lives. So I asked about facts, what they thought, not what they felt, because that's difficult to articulate. And the way I would test that, um, right before I got into the car, when I was leaving either an interview or a crime scene, if I could close my eyes and see the room or the highway or the alley in 360 degrees, if I knew that the blood on the ground was the consistency of, say, tomato ketchup, if I remembered that the cop wiped his hands off the blood on his shirt instead of a rag, if I remember that, if I noted that the sheet of paper folded 4 times that said the dead man was a drug addict was typed in Times New Roman, size 12, all caps. If I remember that the bullet cracked through the left temple instead of the right, or the way the light flared through the window, or that the killer walked away instead of ran. If I knew the color of the shoe, or the tenor of the scream, or what the dead man had for breakfast, meant I could go home because I could bring the story home with me. I can't write what I can't see. Even if it's a story told to me, I need to be able to complete the scene frame by frame in my head. When I go home, I sit at my desk and then I play it back again and again.
And then what would you do? Would you write it up immediately, or what was your approach?
No, actually, I would have all the detail. If there were interviews, I would have the transcripts. I would listen to the interviews, then go over the transcripts again. I would break them down into sequences, into notes, into timelines. Um, and then if there were details I needed to include, I would ram them through in the timeline. Then I would get the investigative reports. I would get the autopsy reports. I'd get everything I can. Um, then I would build the structure. The structure of a chapter for me, for example, sometimes takes 2 weeks, sometimes a month. The structure takes longer than the writing, although the writing takes forever as well. Um, I'm told some writers are gardeners and some are engineers. I'm an engineer. I build things first. Sometimes when I'm building a paragraph, the structure of the paragraph is far longer than the paragraph itself. I need to know what it means and where it's going, one point to another. Then the language comes after.
And often this was at night.
Mm-hmm.
Did you deal, I mean, as a trauma reporter, how do you deal with personal trauma, PTSD? Do you suffer from it? Do you have nightmares? How did you cope with being exposed to this on a daily basis? I mean, it's one thing reading the book. It's quite overwhelming how many dead bodies you saw. So how did you process this mentally?
Well, post-traumatic PTSD is a medical diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been diagnosed. I do not know if I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm uncertain. Certainly, it's a risk for journalists like myself. I'm not rare. I neither will I claim that I have it or don't have it. It was easier. It is easier to dismiss that question and say it's whiskey and nicotine and caffeine, and you're fine. But that wouldn't be true. We're not cameras. We don't take the picture, save it, print it, then delete it. We don't have a delete button. And it's not just me. Many of us who stayed in the field are still on the field, sometimes mentally, sometimes personally, sometimes you carry the guilt across years. Sometimes, if you're anything like me, in the middle of all of that, you get obsessive. You hear a ringing phone, and then if it's an unknown number, you think you're going to pick up on someone who will tell you someone is dead because of a story you wrote. Or you think that if you misplace a comma, you'll get a libel charge. Or someone will die because the sentence framed differently means something else. Or you worry that your credit card bill is not real because someone had already picked it up and knows your address. It's many of these things, and you worry and you look over your shoulder. I can tell you that the best answer I can give for managing it is community. As I said, I was lucky. I worked with some of the best. And these people, Rafi Lerma, Vincent Go, Eloisa Lopez, Alex Arumpak, Ezra Akayan, many names, I can't recite them all, but all of them were there on the streets far more often than I was because I wasn't on the street every night. I pursued investigations. So I was with the families. I was following the police. I was sitting in many places so I could understand the story. These guys, they were there every night. And what's good with community, with a tribe, is that they can stand over a body one night with you. They'll light your cigarette for you. They'll go to dinner with you. They'll talk about the shot. They'll talk about the story. And maybe all of us understand it's a very terrible thing we're seeing. But the great thing is the next day they'll be there beside you again, doing the same thing. And there is a relief in that.
You interviewed the families at the scene, but you also followed up. You saw them again quite often, didn't you? Can you talk about that? How important was that, not only professionally, but just personally to follow up? I mean, there was there was an example in the war in Ukraine. Lindsay Addario, a very famous photographer, took images very early on in the war of a woman and her two children, along with a family friend, who were killed in a shelling. And she didn't just leave it there. She contacted the husband and followed up and got photographs of the family in normal times. And I think that was it's regarded these days as very important for journalists. If they're going to have a duty of care towards people, is not just to interview them at the spot, to follow up. So how important was that for you, that you did have a follow up with the victims' families?
I'm not sure what you mean by follow up.
Well, you met them afterwards. I mean, you met them
after what?
After the actual event.
Certainly, because you have to interview, you have to speak to them. I think my particular circumstance is different because it's a book. There is no follow up because everything was a story,
right?
From the body to the wake, to the funeral, to the child weeping, to the mother losing her job, to the family being threatened, to someone's son being threatened. It's all the way to 6 months ago, because we were still editing 6 months ago. Things were changing on the fly. So I believe in a duty of care, but I also believe in not committing to a promise that the world will change for them.
Right.
I am a journalist. I cannot frame myself as a friend, because if I do, it means that they are giving me the story because I have offered something else other than the promise the story will be told. I hope to return again and again. It is inevitable. You will have relationships, and these are people I respect and care for already because it's been many years. But I also have to be clear. I cannot pay for anything. Other journalists can, but I can't, because I am the one who documented this particular story. It means I am the one exception who can't. So it's a very difficult line to walk. I'm still uncertain if I'm walking it the right way. Um, it's something we have to parse out every time, and many journalists will react differently. And I don't think there's a particularly wrong way to act. I think it's just slightly more difficult because it's a very long project, and we're not at the aftermath yet.
Mm-hmm. You also spoke to the killers.
Yes.
And you had a policeman, Domingo,
Mm-hmm.
who he was familiar. He called you Trish, a name nobody ever calls you.
No, nobody does.
No, I know that. So, I mean, what was it like speaking to them and seeing their motivations? What did you learn from the other side?
I think I didn't discover anything more than any other journalist did. They believed in Rodrigo Duterte. They also liked being empowered. Domingo would say he was delighted. It was the golden days of the police. That back then they would walk down the street and they would be afraid of the criminals. But now the criminals are the ones that are afraid. The criminals are the ones who run away. And Domingo had a cadence to his speaking. He was a fantastic storyteller, much like Duterte. He was a fantastic storyteller. I think that's why I was pleased that he was willing to talk to me. But when it comes to the killers, I think that was slightly different, because they weren't denying they were killing. They were very matter of fact about it. What did I learn? I learned that they valued their job just as much as I valued mine, far more. They said that the more people they killed, the more they protected their families. That killing was like drug addiction. First you're afraid, and then you're okay. And I remember asking quite a lot of questions of one vigilante, and then he stopped and he said, "Ma'am, I have to leave 7 o'clock. So we have to go quickly because I have a job." And we knew that. We knew the language already. We understood each other. The job meant he was going to kill
Right.
someone. So he was going to leave the room where I was in, then he was going to go off to kill. And that was difficult to square with my own head. I like to say there was nothing I could do. Still don't know.
And the name of the book came from a vigilante.
Yes. It was a vigilante that I call Simon, because I can't give you their names. Actually, it's only the vigilantes that are unnamed in the book, because that was the condition for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Simon came from Tondo. From Tondo in Manila. It's one of the poorest areas and where the vigilante gang I investigated operated. Simon said, by the time I spoke to him, he said he had already killed 2 addicts in that year. And he said that Uh, he was religious. He had a wife and children. He had neighbors who were dealers and addicts. So he believed that the more he killed, the better it was, for as long as they were dealers and addicts. And I asked him if he thought he was such a good man, how did he square outright murder with being a good man? And he said, I'm not a bad guy. I'm not all bad. It's just some people need killing.
And you said that speaking to them, the killing got easier than when they did it, right?
Yes, yes. They developed developed new tactics, new strategies. They knew not to hole up at the end of an alleyway. They knew that they had to go in groups of 4 and 5 and 6. They knew how to surveil. They knew how to deploy across the drug war. They were accidentally killing the wrong person. Someone had the wrong shirt, and they killed him. Some there was an occasion someone was pissed off, and they were angry that the woman they were looking for wasn't there, so they killed her son. It sometimes he would concede the vigilantes. I didn't talk to only one. I talked to a number, and although some of them are not in the book, I used them as secondary sources to verify what was told to me. So there was a lot of strategy, and they learned as they went along.
Many journalists think they have a book in them. You know, this is a kind of one of the things of in the profession, you know. And some write them. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're terrible, but it's one of these things in the profession. Can you maybe talk to the journalists in the room or anybody else in the room who thinks they've got a book in them? Can you talk us through that process? Because the sort of going from being a journalist, I mean, to being an author, it's not the same discipline, is it? Could you maybe talk us through some the steps, please?
I am still a journalist. Having written a book does not make you not a journalist. You just happen to have written a book, and you can get called an author, but mostly I think I'm a journalist first before I'm a person, which might be a terrible thing. Um, I did not think I had the book in me. I never aspired to writing a book. And if other journalists think they have a book in them, then the warning I will have is that it is a terrible, soul-destroying process. And you have to believe in the story so badly that that nothing else will matter except this. I signed a 1-year contract with Random House. I missed the deadline 3-4 times. I had a good house. They're good guys. But it was brutal. It was a brutal process because you have to drive yourself. I went to a nonfiction fellowship sometime in 2018 because Rappler had decided I shouldn't be in the country because we were publishing this vigilante story. But the condition of the nonfiction fellowship, I had gotten invited, but the condition was that I had to make an active attempt to write a book proposal because it was a nonfiction fellowship. Most of the people who were there were already writing their books or completing books or waiting for responses for proposals. So I was going in blind. And I was supposed to be there 3 months. And because I had just got out of the war and certainly felt I had run away from it, I wrote nothing for 2 months. But I had an agent, a good guy. He had contacted me in the middle of the war. He was the former editor of Esquire US. And because I was Esquire Philippines, when I was looking for a line editor for one of my Rappler stories, I was pretty desperate already. I needed someone to edit me because I was terrified I wasn't constructing sentences right. In the middle of the war, you just don't have everything narrows to that single article. So I contacted, his name is Erwin Romulo, and I said, I need a line edit, and I need it badly. And he said, does it matter that it's not me? I said no, as long as it's not in the Philippines, because I was worried. So he sent it to David Granger, who used to run Esquire, and Granger had just left Esquire and was a literary agent. So my 10,000 word article came back with a line edit, and it it was life changing. The thoroughness of the edit. So after that, Granger took me through the process. I had him for maybe a year and a half. I did not agree with him. I had to write a book. I did not want to write one, but I went to that fellowship, had to write a proposal. Granger submitted it, and then suddenly had a book.
You talked about you couldn't write it in the Philippines. What about your personal safety now that it's published? Both. I mean, I think that the Philippines, and it's not the only country, not only do journalists face physical threats, they also face legal threats, which obviously Maria Ressa has been the target of legal action in the States. So what's your situation, if you can talk about it? How do you feel about going back?
I'm going home. And that's the only part of the question I will answer.
Good. We have a question, Jake Ganglani, asking, question for Patricia. Based on your reporting and research for your book, does the way in which people view Duterte and his policy differ from region to region? Is he more popular in Leyte compared to Metro Manila? Is he disliked anywhere in the Philippines? I mean, how does the former president's popularity work around the country?
I think all you have to look at are the election results. From the previous elections, you can see the strength of particular dynasties, and in a sense, the Duterte family is already a dynasty. So you can see which bailiwicks belong to them, which bailiwicks don't, where people vote for someone else. I did not look into elections in the book. I'm speaking only as someone who covered the elections. So yes, it differed from province to province, city to city.
When you launched the book in the States in Pen America event with Maria, and I watched the recording, and one thing you said struck me. You wrote it as a citizen of a nation that I cannot recognize as my own. The thousands who were killed with the permission of my own people. I wrote this book because I refused to offer my permission. How do you explain that then? How can you explain that the permission that people gave, that the support that the drug war had?
I think many people were in desperate straits. I think many people were unhappy. I think as much as the Philippines elected with an excess of hope, with a possibility of change, with a possibility of something different. I'm a human rights reporter. There was no way that I could see beyond the lens of a promise that he would kill people. But for other people, that wasn't the operating virtue of Duterte when they voted for him. There are people that I have spoken to, that I have interviewed, and I'm sure many Filipinos know these people, know them in their families, in their communities, maybe are these people themselves. People who voted for Duterte in spite of his promises to kill. Some of them didn't believe he would kill. Presidents make promises, politicians make promises all the time. So they voted for him because he showed more compassion than previous presidents, because he was competent at running a city, because he swore, because he talked like your father, your uncle, your someone who is close to you. He was one of them. So people voted for Rodrigo Duterte for many reasons. And some of them did vote for him because of the drug war, because he knew of a drug addict nearby who would pester the family or steal their money or has destroyed his life and family because of drugs. It is a variety of reasons. It is not a single issue. I would like to add, though,
Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing. I think that it is very easy to reduce the language of a campaigning autocrat to just rhetoric, but we can't afford to do that. When a strong man says he will kill, he means it. When a strong man says he will suppress the press, he means it. When a strong man demeans women, he means it. And when he uses words to threaten, he will use those words when he comes to power. The Philippines is not an exotic case from the global south. This is a story that's happening everywhere, has happened everywhere, is continuing to happen everywhere. And it's a cautionary tale for countries with politicians, with charismatic men all over the world who have the ability to blow a dog whistle and say some people need killing.
We have another question from Govind Journal. He's back on asking about the book. How can, as a journalist, how can you manage your time to write a book? I mean, I think you weren't working for Apple at the time you wrote it, but I mean, any motivational tips or inspirational tips, because it's a lot of work. How do you keep going?
Well, motherfuck, I'm the wrong person to ask about that. I took 4 years to write a 1-year book. To be fair, I really don't think anyone. I don't think I could have written it any quicker. In fact, I was trying to push for another year. I really wanted 1 more year, or 2, or 10. You know, so I wasn't working for Rappler when I wrote this book. I was doing this full time. There was no other way to do it. And I was always one track. Even writing for Rappler, I couldn't do 2 stories at once. I had to do 1 story after the other, and it's the same for this book. So motivation, there was a lot at stake. There was very much at stake. It was an important story for me. And I think to your question earlier to add to the answer earlier of the question of what about all the journalists that think they have a book in them?
Yes.
I don't think it's a book in you. It's a story in you. It's
Right.
not a story you own. It's a story that owns you completely. Because if it's something you have to eat and breathe for 4, 5, 10 years, you have to care. You have to care very much.
Can we talk about Rappler and Maria? How did you first work with her? What's the story behind that?
Oh, I was. It's a very simple story. I worked for ABS-CBN News Channel, and I was an executive producer at that time. I was maybe around 24, 25, something like that. And then my boss was Glenn DeGloria, who was the head of ANC, and then the newsroom head was Maria Ressa. So when they decided to pack up and start Rappler, they asked me to go. I mostly thought they would let me do much the same thing as I did in ANC. I liked them. I thought they were fantastic journalists. So I left. Then I went to Rappler.
And you went with her when she received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes. I was no longer working for Rappler at that time. What was great about leaving Rappler was that I could disappear. I am uncomfortable with cameras, with social media, with all of that. The moment I resigned to write the book, I could disappear from everywhere. I could keep a low profile. I could lock the door and write and go out only to cover. So the Nobel came, I think, just when the world was opening up, just a little bit. from COVID, and I had already been very comfortable sitting in my office, smoking with a locked door and just typing. And I got an invitation, not immediately from the Nobel Prize Committee. It's from the Journalist Association there, to deliver a masterclass on investigative journalism. And I said no at first when they said Oslo. What journalists in the Philippines will tell you, Eric, is I have limited intelligences. I am a moron when it comes to geography. I did not quite understand that Oslo was in Norway and Norway was where they had the Nobel. So I was telling Rappler to send someone else. I called them. I said, I have an invitation. Is there anyone you want to send? I'll just submit a name. And then they laughed and they said, you didn't know, didn't you? You didn't know which city? That's when I went. I decided to go because I thought, well, on one hand, they needed a reporter on the ground. Rappler has a small staff. If I'm going to get flown there for free, might as well throw a camera at me and roll. So I covered Maria. But I thought the side benefit was I could cover it for the book in case I needed it. The structure of the book was still evading me. So I thought I should be there just in case I wanted to put it as part of it.
And you spoke at the Torchlight Parade.
Yes.
That was an amazing event.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yeah, we were all so excited about it. It's one of these things you remember when Maria Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize, you know. We've got a couple of questions. One from Judy. Hello from Manila, Philippines. Question for Patricia. Your book mentioned notable individuals. I'm curious to know, have you had any feedback from the individuals you highlighted in your book? Specifically, has there been any response from the former president?
I conducted due diligence in May of 2023. We wrapped the book September. So I gave them time to answer. There are 6 individuals who were sent letters asking for comment in May. They included President Rodrigo Duterte, former police chief Ronald De La Rosa, and a number of the policemen who were spoken of through the book. If there was in any fashion, any sort of accusation of anything in the book, I would send a letter. It was sent via email. It was sent via registered courier. It was sent via law firms. We sent it to multiple addresses. It was very difficult for President Duterte because he didn't have a foundation or an office. So I had to go through quite a lot of channels until I managed to get to him and at that time, the person who was managing his affairs. I sent a letter. I asked if I could interview the former president, and that I was willing to do it via Zoom or via email because at that time I was not in the country. I got a response. I was very pleased. I got a response. I was told that the president was interested but would prefer questions. That I send advanced questions. I offer advanced questions. I'm of the belief that people cannot say no comment until they know what they're not commenting on. Mm-hmm. So I sent the questions. They were questions of language. They were questions of inconsistencies because across speeches, the president's claims vary. And I wanted to make sure which claims he stood by. I asked, for example, the international community considers what happened in the Philippines as extrajudicial killings or summary executions. And there are some who argue even crimes against humanity. I said that Mr. President did not consider them murder at all, or extrajudicial killings or crimes against humanity. So my question was, what would you like me to call them? Occasionally, the president would also say that he had killed people himself, but the numbers vary speech to speech. Sometimes it's 2 here or 3 there or 1,000, 3,000. The numbers shift. So I asked how many people he personally killed himself and in what manner. I think there were 13, 14 questions in all. 3 days later, or maybe 2 days, it's in the end notes of the book if anyone's interested. The president's representative informed me that he did not have time on his schedule. And that was fine because the questions were received. Read, received, so it's a true no comment. Or no time.
Yeah. Rafi Cabristanti sends a message. Hi, Patricia. Been a fan of yours since I was a campus journalist. Question, any advice for journalists to keep safe under duress and harassment? In my time as a local journalist in my hometown, I had been harassed by a congressman who staunchly supported Duterte because he didn't like my reporting back then. Didn't know what to do, so I decided to move overseas. But I just wanted to know what I should have done in hindsight based on your thought. Thanks.
I think first you ask yourself, is it worth it?
Mhm.
Most of us likely say yes. I don't know. It depends on your personal risk assessment. It depends who's got your back. It depends if you think that people will back you up, that you have support, that sort of thing. What I would do is I would look for my tribe. I was lucky when I was covering the drug war. At the height of the drug war, I had Rappler behind me. And I also had the night shift. And I cannot understate the value of working with the night shift across the drug war. We had each other's backs. So it was always important. I don't have any particularity in my advice towards harassment and safety and security because it's an issue-based situation and I don't want to misspeak depending on your particular situation.
I know that Maria's many other Filipino journalists suffer terrible online harassment. In fact, we call it online violence now. I mean, it goes beyond that. And of course, women journalists are particularly targeted. One comment, it was either in an interview or it was in the book, you said that a large percentage of journalists in the Philippines are women. You said that. Yeah. Why is
Yes.
that? I mean, why is it a profession that attracts so many women in the Philippines in particular? I mean, there are a lot of women journalists around the world, but is there any specific reason in the Philippines?
I wish I knew. It's a question I always ask. Well, it's a question I started asking a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when I started going to conferences and I started being put in panels uh, to speak about how we need more women in journalism. And I didn't know what to say because I've never had a boss who wasn't female. My newsroom is female, and it's not because they tried to make it female. It's just the reporters who are there. So I am told that it is possible that this is because of the aftermath of martial law, when it was the women who were filing their stories quietly through the magazines. I am told, but this is secondhand, I am told that there were most of the men had either been jailed or co-opted or whatnot. There are female journalists who will tell you that the reason there are more female journalists in the Philippines is because female journalists have bigger balls. I did not say that. I am just repeating a secondhand source. Mostly, I don't have an answer. Maybe it's just how it plays.
So we've got a minute left. So I'd just like to ask you, what's next for you, Pat? What's your what have you what what comes next?
Well, I am a Filipino field journalist, so I go home to the Philippines and go back on the field.
And what's the story? What do you see as the story? I mean, you covered the drug war. What's the story in the Marcos
I
era?
don't know. I think there are many stories that need to be told. I've been telling a single story for 7 years. I suspect I'll tell the same story again and again. I think for a time, I'll go home and I will have to talk about the book because I am cognizant of the fact I wrote in English and the book is expensive. And the only contact many people will have with the book is to hear me talk about it. So I'll do that. It's part of the job. I think the storytelling is part of the job. And when that's done, I'll go in the field and figure out what the next story is.
Well, thank you very much for talking us this tonight. It was fascinating. Thank you. Inspirational for your fellow journalists, and congratulations on the book again. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.
Night.